Well, good morning and welcome to the fourth quarter meeting of the Technology Executives Roundtable Charlotte. Our topic today is Economic Forecast for 2021, Impact on Charlotte and our technology community. And I'm John Yates. I chair the technology practice at the law firm of Morris, Manning & Martin. We started out this morning with a breakout room question: are you positive, negative, or neutral on growth opportunities for 2021? And if you haven't responded to that in the chat box, please go ahead and add your comments. I am pleased to report that as of right now, I believe everybody is positive. There's a couple double positives, and I think the accountants are triple positives. So things look positive at this point. As far as Zoom etiquette goes, if you please mute yourself during the presentation, please use the chat box if you have any questions. And you might want to put your Zoom in speaker view, which allows you to see the speakers when they're talking with regard to the forecast. We are also a recording for educational purposes. And being a lawyer, I have to tell you the normal disclaimer, which is this is for general educational purposes, not for any specific legal, accounting, or tax advice. And I'm sure that our speaker is not going to guarantee his forecast, although I'm sure we'll learn a lot about his thoughts on 2021. I want to thank our sponsors as well: CBRE, Insperity, Dual Boot Partners, Signature Bank, MBL Advisors, DHG, and Woolen Webb. And also, I'm very pleased that Woolen Webb has constructed our website for TER Charlotte, which will be announced and released in a few days. So look for that, and you'll be able to see additional information regarding future meetings. Just to give you a quick update on the mission of TER, it's to provide a unique forum for CEOs, CFOs, and executives of the fast-growing tech companies in the Queen City to share, challenge, and test our ideas freely so we're better equipped to run companies. Now, a little history on the Technology Executives Roundtable. It was founded in 1980s for US tech leaders, and it was actually founded by Digital Equipment Corporation. When DEC went out of business because they were effectively acquired, the group was reinvented in the 90s in Atlanta and became TER Atlanta. We now have the chapters here in Charlotte, in the upstate of South Carolina, and Charleston. And in 2021, there'll be a new chapter in Florida. The value proposition for this group is to deliver programs with practical insights and best practices to benefit tech executives. And we also have a key deliverable, which is a Southeast Tech Executive Compensation Report for 2021 that will come out in just a few months. Now, the great value of this report is it's an executive compensation report of tech companies that are in the Southeast. So if you're trying to find out information for compensation, that's a very relevant report and will be very useful to your board and your compensation committee. And then, as I mentioned, we have our new website that'll be constructed and it'll be present and live very soon. The agenda for today, we had our breakout rooms and very interested in feedback on that. I think they went well. There was some good discussion there. And we're going to have a follow-up program survey to get your ideas about programs for 2021. We also have a fund of the quarter at each of our meetings. And today we're very pleased that Niraj Vora of Naples Technology Ventures will be our fund of the quarter. We'll have the fireside chat, the economic forecast from Mark Vittner, and John Christenberry of CBRE will be the moderator, along with a couple special guests. We'll have an opportunity for Q&A, and then make a note of the next meeting date, which is March 3rd of next year. And it'll be a venture capital roundtable with leading venture capitalists from the Carolinas, Boston, and Silicon Valley. So let me go ahead and turn it over to Niraj to talk about Naples Technology Ventures in Florida. So Niraj, thank you for being with us, and take it away. Tell us about NTV.
John, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting us to this. Excited to meet everybody, and excited to tell you guys a little bit more about Naples Technology Ventures. So we, about a month ago, announced the closing of our $50 million fund. We are very focused on the software world, the enterprise software world in particular. And obviously this day and age, that means software as a service. We're different from a lot of other funds out there in a couple of big ways. One of them is the fact that we are actually interested in Series A rounds and earlier stage companies, and I'll talk a little bit more detail about that. The other is that the two co-founders of the fund, Mike and Bridge, they both come from the operational side of things, not from the financial services side of things. What that means is that we really try to help our portfolio companies from operational standpoint. We never take control. We're minority investors. We don't want to run the business, but we're able to answer questions that many other VCs may not be able to answer because they've lived through it. And I've had 10 years of CFO experience myself as well. So my official role at the fund is Chief Investment Officer, which means that I help the fund find companies to invest in and also obviously do the diligence and help the companies grow. The other way we're a little bit different from a typical venture fund is we don't necessarily put ourselves on the boards of the companies when we invest. We actually have a very talented pool of advisors, some of whom are actually limited partners in our fund, and they come from the industry. So depending on the investment company, we'll have one of them sit on the board because we believe that adds more value than we could provide. So again, the approach that we take is, what are the things that we can do to really help the company grow? Because if we're successful in that, our investment is successful, so it's a win-win all around. So those are a couple of the differentiators, but I'll talk a little bit more detail about what we're specifically looking for. So we're specifically looking for Series A investments. We'll go a little bit earlier than that if we have to. We do look for companies that have finished products and clients, referenceable clients. So we're not doing investments in pre-revenue companies. We are very interested in fintech. And when I say fintech, I mean a very broad definition of fintech. I know certain people have started segmenting fintech in multiple ways, but we look at fintech to include insurtech, regulatory tech, payments, everything that you can broadly define as technology that's being sold into the financial services vertical. The other area that we're very interested in is digital health. And those two areas are interesting because if you don't mind, I don't know who has control. Do I have control of the slides or? Thank you. Actually, if you could go one more down. Thank you. So the two co-founders of the fund, Mike and Bridge, I won't read all of their backgrounds, you can do that, but they both come from the operational world, as I shared with you. Mike comes from a financial services tech world. Among other things, he was the CTO of Legg Mason. He was a super senior executive at Broadridge and DST. So that's the fintech area. And then Bridge Sharma, he comes from the health tech world. He built up a company, sold it to TriZetto. So that's why digital health is something that we believe we can add value to and understand. And again, those are the two reasons, or they are the two reasons why we're specifically interested in fintech and digital health. My background, again, I won't read that either. I have both fintech expertise from an investment banking perspective, as well as having been a CFO of 4 different early stage companies. So we combine that into being able to invest in companies that we really believe we understand and find ways to help them grow. I'm sorry, I'm going to flip around on this. If we could just go back a couple of slides, because I think we skipped one. Yep, thank you. So, again, just to emphasize the investments that are of interest to us, Series A rounds, we are looking for companies that have finished a product. We are looking for companies that have referenceable clients, obviously a recurring revenue model when you talk about SaaS. We look for governance and transparency. We try to be very transparent with everybody we speak with. That doesn't necessarily mean I respond to every single email, on a timely basis, just because like everybody else's inbox, my inbox is deluged, but we do try to get back to everybody as quickly as possible. And we try to be pretty clear up front. Hey, we think this is a fit, or we don't think this is a fit. And, we think this is kind of the valuation range that we could be interested in. And this is a valuation range that we may not be interested in. Just learnings from all of our backgrounds in terms of how to treat people, try to do the right thing, and find good management teams with good products that we can help grow. That's really the essence of NTV. I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know if there's a Q&A right now or later, but happy to answer any questions. These companies are all from the first fund. So this group, Naples Technology Ventures, started in 2018. There was a $10 million fund. It was really just friends and family money, if you will. And there were 12 investments that were made out of that fund. There's already been a couple of exits. You can see that Fixit and Ventru, but there's still about 10 companies in the fund. There's one or two more exits that will probably happen in the next 6 months, but it's been very, very successful first fund. And that's what allowed us to raise the second fund. And we hope to be just as successful with the second fund, so we can have a third fund.
Right. Thank you. A couple of quick questions have come in. First of all, given the fact that COVID-19 is out there and you can't go make face-to-face visits, is Naples Technology Ventures still making investments, and will you be making those in Q1 of 2021?
Yep, great question. We actually talked about this in one of the breakout sessions. So we are finding ourselves even more productive because you're able to squeeze in more Zoom meetings on a daily basis without having to get in an airplane or drive around. We have 2 live term sheets with companies that I shared with somebody a little bit earlier. They've all happened working remotely. We haven't met with those companies, but we're in heavy due diligence. There's data rooms, there's Zoom meetings, and we are absolutely hoping and scheduling to close one by the end of this year, and the second one in sometime in January. So we are absolutely active without worrying about COVID.
Niraj, that's great. One final question. Charlotte is a key banking center, and obviously fintech and insurtech are 2 key areas there. For a lot of the folks that are participating today in this TER meeting, they may wonder what's the best way to contact Niraj and to learn about Naples Tech Ventures. Maybe tell us the best way to contact you, and then share with us the worst way to contact you so that people know how they can get in touch with you and get your attention.
Yeah, sure. Great question. So, the reason that we're excited to be on this session is because we are extremely interested in building up our brand in the Carolinas and in the Georgia marketplace. Those are very important fintech innovation areas. And given the fact that we're pretty close geographically, we are super interested in building up our brand there. So I would say go ahead and email me directly, just reference this meeting. And again, I won't promise I'll return your email within the next 10 minutes or so, but I will make the promise that I will return your email within a couple of days at the most.
Niraj, we appreciate your time. It's great to have a Florida fund that's focused on the Southeast and that's interested in the areas that are of great interest to us in the Queen City, fintech, insurtech, regtech, and the like. So thank you for your participation, for being with us.
Thank you.
So now it's my pleasure to introduce you to John Christenberry. Many of you know John. He's a co-founder of the Technology Executives Roundtable Charlotte. He's with CBRE, and John has some special guests, and John will also be moderating the fireside chat with our keynote today. So John, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm super excited to have our keynote speaker here to discuss the economic forecast for the Carolinas and tech in 2021. Mark Bittner over at Wells Fargo, senior economist. I saw him speak in January, and he, for what it's worth, accurately predicted COVID as a black swan that could tank the economy. And so I'm interested to hear how 2021 is going to fare. It looks like it's going to be positive from a lot of you all. Hopefully Mark feels the same way. Tariq Bakari, city councilman and co-founder of Aggressant, is going to be one of our special guests. He's going to come in and ask a couple questions, and also want to send a congratulations to North Carolina Congressman John Bradford on his recent election, and he also is a founder of and CEO of PetScreening.com. So they'll introduce themselves here in just a minute, but we're going to let Mark kind of take the reins and jump into his presentation. He's got a deck that he's going to share with us, run through for, call it 10 to 15 minutes, and then we're going to flip it over to John and Tariq to kick us off with some Q&A. Mark?
And Mark, I think you're muted.
So that's okay. I wasn't saying anything. I've got a presentation I'm going to share with you here, and I think I've got it. Geez.
We're going to allow you to share. So Amelia is going to give you capability to be able to share your presentation.
Yeah, I don't know. I just totally messed up here. Let me see what I can do here.
Well, you're doing that. I'm going to report back here as looking at the positives and the negatives and the neutrals. I have yet to see any negatives with regard to 2021, which is pretty miraculous given the nature of the market that we're in right now. I've said a couple of way positives on here, and most notably too, I see that some of the folks that are involved with funds like Niraj and others are quite optimistic about investment opportunities. Niraj, let me ask you to unmute yourself while Mark's getting his presentation up. And let me ask you, when it comes to other funds that are out there, you were optimistic about raising capital in 2021. What does the market look like for you with respect to other funds that are out there? Do you think they're also getting ready to write checks in the new year?
Yeah, so the conversations that I'm having, John, have been pretty positive with my peers, and the ones that have capital, they are absolutely looking to deploy it. Not only on the VC side of things, but even on the PE side of things, there's definitely a lot of capital looking for good investments.
And one thing we're finding too is that, and this is an interesting phenomenon, that these funds have cash and they've got to deploy it. And so, Mark, you've got a lot of cash at Wells Fargo. So tell us a little bit about what the economic outlook is there, and walk us through.
Yeah, I can't deploy that cash, but yeah, we are sitting on a little bit of cash. I want to briefly go over our outlook, and I had a problem there with my multiple screens, and it was putting it to the side. It wouldn't have been very conducive. But in terms of where we are in the economy, we had this very sharpest recession that we ever had, and it was also very, very short. In that, when the economy was in real good shape in January and February, we were on course to have what looked to be 3 or 4% GDP growth in the first quarter, and then as things began to shut down in March, it shut down so suddenly that it pulled economic growth down negative for the first quarter, wiped out what was good in January and February, and then the second quarter we declined it better than a 30% annual rate, and then we came back real strong in the third quarter. The economy actually bottomed out on April 15th, and we know that from all the high frequency data that we look at. And then we rebounded a 33% annual rate in the third quarter. And of course, during that time frame, we had the slowdown during the summer as COVID cases spiked again. Late summer, we started coming back into the fall, and then now, where we are right now, growth seems to be retreating because people and businesses are disengaging from economic behavior that involves high contact. So we're seeing that growth is likely to slow. When we look at the forecast, fourth quarter GDP is still likely to be positive, but it's sort of like the first quarter, where the first 2 months, October and November, were really strong. December is likely to be pretty weak. January is likely to be weak. I think that 2 month period is likely to be soft, and that means that the first quarter might be, GDP growth in the first quarter could be close to zero. It might be slightly negative. I think a lot depends on how the Biden administration chooses to do things. If they encourage lockdowns, and when I was asked about the difference between the two presidential, between a Trump and a Biden administration, I said that in my view that a Biden administration would try to slow walk progress against COVID, because in a crisis environment, they have a greater ability to reshape priorities. And so I think that may happen. But particularly, I would think that it wouldn't happen if we would see vaccines roll out a little bit sooner than they are right now. Regardless of that, we're pretty positive about GDP growth. In 2021, it's likely to be around 5% for the year, even with a slow start to the year. The high frequency data give us a lot of information. You gather that from smartphones, smartwatches, TSA checkpoints, everything, the Internet of Things. is basically providing us so much information on what people are doing in real time. And that's something that really got put to use in COVID, was first put to use so that we could get an idea as to how much China's economy was slowing in COVID, and it was quickly adapted here in the US. One of the things that we saw in most recently is that while travel picked up during the Thanksgiving period, in-person shopping did not. So the behavior of people is probably more important than the actual shutdowns themselves. But the shutdowns, when government chooses to enact a curfew, I think that also causes another iteration of caution on the part of consumers and businesses. We have known for a long time that the holiday season would be challenging. We knew that the period from Thanksgiving to February is the height of the cold and flu season, and the symptoms of a cold or a flu are similar to COVID, and that's likely to put additional strain on the hospital system and the healthcare system. And so we knew that growth was likely to slow during this period. What has changed is that the spike in COVID cases came a little bit earlier, and so we're seeing the spike occur from a higher level. And I try to follow just like everybody else, because it's not really in my wheelhouse to know everything about viruses. But it seems that the virus has mutated, and I feel confident in saying it's mutated. The Baltimore Ravens said that they had 4 different mutations of the virus in their latest kind of shutdown that they had of their practice facility. And it's mutated in a way, it seems from what I've read, where in the United States it's been more contagious but slightly less deadly than it's been in China and Europe. So, and for what that's worth, it may help explain why it's spread as much. My sense is that we do a better job of reporting in the US than a lot of other countries do. I don't think it's really that much more widespread here, but in any event, that we are going to see a little bit of a slowdown because of that. The other thing that has changed is that the geography of economic growth has been altered by COVID, in that there has been a movement away from large, dense, expensive, globally connected cities. And the largest of those is New York, and a lot of folks are moving away from New York. And I did a number of interviews yesterday talking about this topic. And in New York, they were like, well, when COVID's over, isn't everybody going to come back? And I said, no. I said, more people are going to leave. I said, COVID's preventing a lot of people from leaving because they're not actually in New York right now, but they have to go back and pack up and leave. I said, but more people are going to leave. COVID's preventing them from leaving right now. So it is likely to accelerate. That's what happens when you have a recession. When you have a recession that's triggered by an exogenous shock, it's even greater. People were leaving New York prior to the pandemic because it was too expensive, and the advantages of being in New York didn't outweigh the disadvantages of being in New York. Same thing's happening in Boston and Philadelphia and in the District of Columbia, which had a resurgence the last decade. And where most of these folks are moving, though, is to the suburbs of those same areas. So while Manhattan is seeing its population shrink, the other boroughs of New York are all growing. So it's not as if they're all headed to Charlotte or Raleigh or Atlanta, but larger numbers are headed out that way. And in California, and they're headed to Arizona, Nevada, Denver, Salt Lake City, Boise. The other wrinkle that's in here is that since April, because I wasn't really looking at the social unrest, we've seen an accelerated outmigration from all of those globally connected cities. But we've also seen an accelerated outmigration from Seattle, Minneapolis, and Portland, which is probably tied to the unrest. And in the case of Seattle, it's the worst that we've seen since the 1970s, when they put up the billboard that said, last person out of Seattle, turn out the lights. Again, in Seattle's case, a lot of people are moving to other areas in the state, but a lot of them are going to Boise. A lot of them are going to the small parts of the Mountain West. And the ability to work remotely has got a lot of folks from both coasts that are out there in Utah. I talked to folks in Utah yesterday, And folks have said, we're not going back. Folks from the East Coast that move out to Utah, they figure they can work till noon and then play all afternoon. It's a pretty good lifestyle. So they're not planning on coming back. In terms of North Carolina, Charlotte and Raleigh remain top destinations for businesses and residents that are relocating from other parts of the country. We have seen a little bit of a shuffling in the order. Jacksonville, Florida has actually seen the largest percentage increase in migration since the pandemic began. And it's interesting, Jacksonville, Florida has the lowest median home prices of any large metropolitan area on the East Coast. So if you're looking for areas of over 1 million people, they have the lowest housing cost of any areas with over 1 million people that are on the Atlantic coast. And Tampa is a close second, but it's on the Gulf Coast, but it's still a close second. I would throw it in the same group. The home prices are rising in all these cities that folks are moving to. They're growing more slowly in the areas they're leaving. There's a lot of concern about office buildings, and I get the question all the time: are people going to go back to work in office buildings? And I think office buildings are going to be just fine. 90% of the work that's done in office buildings will continue to be done in office buildings, but 10% is going to be done remotely. And lastly, here in North Carolina, manufacturing and logistics are doing pretty well. Surprisingly well. We put out a piece out on the Triad and the Mountain West, which basically the Triad. North Wilkesboro, for some reason, is booming right now, and Hickory and Asheville, looking at those areas. And manufacturing is doing very well. Some of that is that with people spending more time at home, they're upgrading their home furnishings, and so the furniture industry is doing a little bit better. The tech hardware that we make in North Carolina that's tied to 5G, whether it's fiber optic cable or the, I'm not sure that this is called a repeater or whatever they put on the cell phone towers. We make a lot of stuff that goes into 5G, which is somewhat surprising that it's not all made in China, but we do make a lot of stuff here in North Carolina, and that's been a little bit of a bright spot. And then the reshoring of PPE has been a bright spot for the textile industry. So all of those have rebounded a little bit. In terms of the number of jobs, it's relatively small. Looking at COVID, one of the things that really stands out with COVID is that the pickup in COVID cases has been across the country. We did see it roll over a little bit after Thanksgiving, but it takes a couple of weeks for that Thanksgiving travel to kick in. We think we'll see another spike. My sense, it's kind of a cruel irony for poor old Donald Trump, is that that COVID will probably speak right around Inauguration Day, and come down regardless. That's probably when this latest spike will be, and the mask mandate that Biden's going to put on will probably get all the credit. I'm not going to go through all these charts, but I mentioned the high frequency data, and with the high frequency data, that's an awful lot to watch. If you were to watch all the different high frequency series, the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas actually sums them up into a weekly economic index, and that's on the right-hand side here. And the year-to-year change in that very closely tracks the year-to-year change in real GDP. As you can see, we're still improving. It's not a steady improvement by any stretch of the imagination. And we do see some temporary lulls and pullbacks, which coincide with the resurgence in COVID cases. But every time COVID resurges, people have become more accustomed to it. People can weigh the risk better for themselves. And so things are not shutting down nearly as much today as they did in the spring, even though the number of COVID cases is a lot higher. In terms of employment, we've added back about half the jobs that were lost. We lost 22 million jobs in the country in March and April. We're down 9.8 million jobs. Most of those job losses are at restaurants. 1/2 of all restaurant jobs were wiped out. Hotels, bars as well, entertainment venues, hair salons, fitness studios, administrative services, and mall-based retailing. But all of those jobs have in common is that They are relatively low-paying jobs, and unemployment insurance and the extra unemployment insurance replaced all or most of those lost earnings. And as a result, consumer spending has held up relatively well. If you look at state and local finances across the country, you would think that we're in dire shape. But on an overall basis, state and local revenues are higher today than they were a year ago. Sales tax receipts are up. Property values have held up very well. Income tax receipts have held up relatively well. So you got a lot of people out there crying poverty, and the numbers just don't back it up. The big problem is the federal budget deficit, which is blown out with repeated stimulus. The outlook for housing, we've raised it for the decade, all throughout the decade, that we've seen a move back toward home ownership. All the home ownership has increased among every age cohort. There's a real preference for single family housing. And we're seeing a lot of growth in suburban markets of auto-driven economies. So those are the Charlottes, the Atlantas, the Dallases, the Phoenixes, the economies that were built around the automobile. They're all growing very, very rapidly. If you look around the country and you look at states that have been slow to reopen their economies, they have the highest unemployment rates in the country, like California, Nevada, New York, Pennsylvania. States that have been that were earlier to reopen their economies, like Georgia, have among the lowest unemployment rates in the country. And Nebraska currently has a 3% unemployment rate. Utah currently has a 4.1% unemployment rate. North Carolina has been somewhere in the middle. I mean, we haven't been a California or New York, but we haven't been a Georgia or a South Carolina either. We've dragged our feet on reopening. Florida's a bit of a special case in that you've got a lot of tourism, and tourism has been kind of the center of the storm. And so Orlando and Miami's numbers drag down the rest of the state. Tampa, Jacksonville, Southwest Florida are doing better than the rest of the state. And one of the reasons they're doing better is that seasonal residents are staying longer. And so it's a real mixed performance in Florida, but the strongest growth in Florida was coming from Orlando and Miami. And so the loss of that has really been a big hit for them. Looking at some of the same numbers in North Carolina, just like the nation, we've added back a little bit more than half the jobs that we lost. Leisure and hospitality has been the big weak spot. The median wage in leisure and hospitality is $425 a week. The pandemic unemployment insurance, more than 90% of the people that were laid off in leisure and hospitality were receiving twice as much income per week than they were when they were working. Looking around the state, this is where employment has rebounded the most. Charlotte is right in line with the state at 52%. For some reason, Burlington jumps up at 7. They replaced 70% of the jobs that were lost in the recession. My sense is that Burlington and Jacksonville both, they have some special circumstances. In Burlington, the Triangle and the Triad are both bleeding into that market. And in Jacksonville, you have the military, and both of them have a smaller leisure and hospitality sector than large cities do. A couple of charts on tech employment. It's come down. And in North Carolina, we do produce a lot of tech hardware. And if you look on the left-hand side on this page, you see the drop in employment in tech hardware has really been the big weak spot. That larger exposure to tech hardware is one of the reasons why the Triangle has consistently been the slowest growing in terms of employment, the slowest growing market among all the readily identifiable tech hubs around the country. So it's also that slowdown and I guess transition away from hardware to software has weighed on rents to a greater degree and on salaries to some extent. One of the high frequency series that we have is consumer sentiment. This is like the last chart I've got here on a daily basis for North Carolina, and you can see how much it's come down since the latest spike in COVID cases. You can see this on a daily basis. We get that from a group called Morning Consult. Oh, there's two other charts in here, just real quick. This is asking rents for apartments. The line at the bottom is San Francisco. The next line above that is New York. I think the line above that is Los Angeles. And the lines at the top, Dallas is still shown growth. But the strongest growth in apartment asking rents, and this reflects the influx of population and the new construction that we've seen, it's been Charlotte, Raleigh, and Durham. I mean, those have been among the best markets in the country. These are asking rents, though. Effective rents are falling, but because there's so much new product in these markets, asking rents have been rising. And then this is the last chart, which is some data from LinkedIn that shows the proportion of LinkedIn users in each metro area that moved there within the last year. So with every 10,000 LinkedIn users in Austin, 140 of them moved there within the last year, which is the largest number in the largest share in the country. Charlotte is number 2 on that list. And this is data we've been following for for a few years. Charlotte wasn't on this list 4 years ago. About 3 years ago, we made it into the top 10. I think we were number 7 when we first broke into the top 10, and now number 2. And then there's this best places to live in the United States, which I put on there for a couple of reasons. One, it matches up well with the LinkedIn data. But 2, Denver has consistently fallen on the rankings of where people are actually moving because it's gotten very expensive. Portland, San Francisco, Seattle, and Minneapolis are all seeing outflows right now. So people might like those cities, but something is fundamentally broken there that's turning people away. So let me stop there and open up for questions.
Mark, that's great. I appreciate you running us through that deck. Good to hear your thoughts on 90% of the workforce going back to the office. That sounds like job security for me for the time being. I'm going to flip it over to John Bradford, Congressman John Bradford, to ask the first bit of questions, and then we'll go to TAR from there. For those folks who have questions, feel free to lob them in the chat or send them directly to me, and I'll make sure that they get asked to Mark here in just a bit.
Thank you, and Mark, thank you for your insight. So here in Charlotte, I think everyone's probably aware that Charlotte has a task force called the Moves Task Force, and they're starting to publicly release some of the information around what they're calling their transformational mobility network plan, calling for a 1 cent for mobility, which really translates to a 1 cent sales tax increase across the entire county. So it's just not Charlotte, it's actually Mecklenburg County. And of course, the impact means to get a sales tax increase, it's got to come to the state legislature, which is where I have a particular interest, because I have a feeling I'll be a pretty popular guy in Raleigh, people coming and asking my opinion, being that I'm from Mecklenburg County. So that said, what are your thoughts on this large plan, which includes light rail and greenways and sidewalks, and more particularly the cost and the impact that 1 penny could have on families when we're talking about things like affordable housing? Can our community really handle another 1 penny tax? And to frame that would make Charlotte or Mecklenburg County the most expensive sales tax in the entire state. We're already at the very top. So going another penny would put us even further ahead of everyone else, which probably wouldn't set terribly well with a lot of lawmakers in Raleigh. So what are your thoughts around that, sir?
Yeah, I do see the advantages of mass transit. I mean, I do see I think there are folks out there saying, "Oh, we're going to have moving cars," but people do have mass transit backwards. I mean, a lot of people who try to justify mass transit think that it's going to reduce traffic congestion. And there's never been a mass transit project in the history of the world that reduced congestion. The only value of mass transit is moving people around in congested areas. That's where it proves its value. I mean, when I go to Atlanta, a lot of times I'll take MARTA into Buckhead because that's quicker. And then Uber from there or walk to where I need to go to. It's quicker, particularly if I'm arriving around rush hour or something. So that's the value of having a transit system. I do think that when the economy gets stronger, when we're back growing fully, that businesses were increasingly looking to locate along in areas that had viable transit systems. So I see the value in it. I just, the question is, how do you fund it? And in the case of Charlotte, one of the things that I was thinking is, I said, Charlotte's been very lucky in that when we funded the first line, McCrory was mayor and Bush was president, and McCrory was buddies with Bush. And we got the line funded. We got a lot of federal dollars. And when we did the North Line, we had, it had swung to Obama, and we had Anthony Fox, and Anthony got us money for the North Line and got us money for the streetcar too. And maybe we're going to be fortunate enough and get some more federal dollars, but I don't know how you fund it. I really don't know how you fund it. It would seem to me that it would make more sense to get more funding from a tax increment financing framework where the property values near where the light rail are going to go up. And if you could capture that somehow to fund it, I don't know how it does it, but the sales tax, it at some point, and I would, you raise a very good point. This may be the point. It just gets too onerous, and it's a very regressive tax at a time that we're talking about trying to figure out ways to improve economic mobility. You're going to be raising taxes on the lowest paid earners. So I think that they need to find some other way of funding it other than sales tax.
Well, we appreciate that, and one of our attendees has a good point where mass transit has historically been an economic driver along mass transit. So I think the point is not. I think there's fans of mass transit, but not necessarily the method of funding. So John, I appreciate that. Tarek, what about you?
Yeah, let me build on to John's question with a quick follow-up, and then I'll ask mine as well. Mark, I think that makes sense. And, we've talked to you a lot on the city council side as we're thinking through these things. I'd agree with your sentiment of it's not necessarily a congestion reliever in its own right, but it is pitched as a transit solution in moving people. And I think in our own history here and in some other places, it's quite clear that it's much more of an economic development tool than a transit tool, and look no further than South End for that. So with that being said, and we don't have to debate on calling the spade a spade and doing an ROI analysis on is it economic development or transit. I guess when you think of the trade-offs of, all right, we already had a $6 billion road backlog as of like 3 years ago that needed to be funded and was unfunded. We've got 8 to 12 billion here. And then you've got the autonomous vehicle debate, and when will they be ready, and is it there? Regardless of your view on when it's ready, they're going to be on the road in regular cities by 2022. And then it's going to be up to the investments the cities make in their infrastructure, both road infrastructure, 5G, and the network communications that enable it, and then the regulatory reform needed. What's your view on prioritizing something like that could disrupt fixed rail versus going and making the largest bet in Charlotte's history on fixed rail that's more of an economic development tool than a transit tool?
Well, I think that we're probably going to wind up in systems that have both, and there's going to be advantages to having both. You're still going to deal with a congestion issue even with autonomous vehicles. Maybe folks can do more work while they're sitting in traffic, but you're still going to deal with a congestion issue. And right now we've got this move away from density, so it's going to make transit systems a harder sell. And so I think that cities that have transit systems are going to be at a huge advantage at getting federal funding. I would hope that we position ourselves, just from a Charlotte perspective, to be in the best position to get any dollars if they do get some sort of big infrastructure program, because there will be money in there for mass transit, and cities that have systems in place would be best suited to get those dollars. My sense is that the best use would be in funding kind of the most commonsensical routes. It would make sense to extend the South Line to Rock Hill, particularly if you could get South Carolina on board and you connect if you connected Winthrop with UNC Charlotte, the two largest universities in the area, that's an area that Charlotte comes up short, not to mention you're kind of connected. I guess, you could switch and get on the streetcar to go up to Johnson C. Smith and Johnson and Wales or CPCC. So, those things would make some sense to me. They'd probably be a lot less expensive. The Silver Line, it sure does look good on paper, but boy, that looks pretty expensive. I mean, I just don't, when you think about building entire new lines, that's when I think you really run into the question of what's the future going to look like when, if we started today, maybe it's going to be there in 10 or 15 years. That's where you really get into those questions. So maybe it's, what can we do to expand what we've got in place to make it even more viable? And maybe it's building that line. They're talking about, connecting it to Valentine in some way, shape, or form. That seems awfully expensive too, but that might be a better use of it. I do think that I saw this in Atlanta. We were seeing it in Charlotte, where there was a lot more interest in businesses saying, gosh, I'd really like to locate along a transit line. I think it's particularly important if it connects to the airport. And, one of the things that I've long felt would be less expensive is if we use the existing rail infrastructure to have commuter rail that maybe started in Kings Mountain, because that would be the cheapest place to park the trains, and connect to Gastonia and Belmont and the airport in Charlotte, and then it would go up to the northeast, up to Salisbury. I mean, that would make a lot more sense. And actually, if you did that in Charlotte and you did that in Raleigh, they would just meet each other. And it's not so much that it has to be high-speed rail; it just has to be very frequent. That would be a lot cheaper. That would be a lot cheaper to do than building a new line, and would have a very positive economic impact.
Okay, well, I'll take that back. We'll get that done. And then my primary question was, and I'll make it quick. What's your 2022 forecast of what that looks like on the premise of this year, movie theaters crushed, music venues crushed, large events extinct, things like esports transitioning from a in-person boom that really just died to a media rights boom, and now content is king there. What's the future of the entertainment, hospitality, and tourism industry when the dust settles, for, on a macro, but also for a city like Charlotte, where 1 in 9 people work in that industry?
Well, it's a little scary from one perspective, and that is that every CFO seems to dream about zero-based budgeting. They said, gosh, if we could just have zero-based budgeting, we could solve everything. And for the first time ever, we've got zero-based budgeting in travel and entertainment expense. And so I think that when businesses begin to reopen, relook at that, there's going to be a higher hurdle rate for travel and entertainment expense. And that's going to be trouble. That's going to be somewhat problematic. I think that personal leisure travel will come back much sooner because they don't really have the same liability issues. And I would guess there's a lot of people that got married, didn't have a celebration, so there'll probably be a lot of that. There'll be a lot of weddings, bar mitzvahs, family events. That's going to help the travel sports. Not just the esports, but the travel sports teams and things that are so big. We'll see that stuff come back. So I do think that hospitality comes back a little bit. I wonder about the convention business. I think that we did everything right in expanding the convention center at a time where business was going to be slow, not this slow, but it was going to be slow because of HB2. But my sense is that's going to be a tougher business the next couple of years. I don't think it's going to come back that quickly. And in Charlotte's case, we've added a lot of capacity. You got the Grand Bohemian and the JW Marriott coming on, and we had the Embassy Suites before that, and we've the overall occupancy rate doesn't look that bad for hotels, but we have a lot of hotels that aren't open too. So that's pretty troubling.
Thank you.
TER, John, thanks for those questions. I'm going to roll into the next question coming in. Have we seen the worst of a recession?
I think we have. I mean, I think that, you know, that the lockdown in April, when we really didn't know what we were dealing with, was the worst of it. I don't think that large manufacturing plants are going to shut down in this iteration. And I don't think that people are going to stop all types of behavior as well. So December and January are going to be tough. And I think it's going to be tougher on the hospital systems. And we're probably going to see you know, a lot elective surgeries shut down again, and our elective procedures and shut down again. And so, or at least severely curtailed. So it's going to be a little bit of a rough period, but it's not going to be anywhere near as what we saw, near to what, close to what we saw in March and April.
Perfect. John Bradford, you had a question?
Yeah, so I have just one follow-up question, Mark. So I have seen firsthand that some of the best legislation doesn't come from lawmakers in Raleigh. It actually comes from ideas from boots on the ground. So we have a bunch of tech executives. You're obviously a chief economist. So as I start the legislative session for 2021, convene February 2nd, and there's about 75 days where there's a race to get bills filed before we have what we call crossover period, before bills have to leave one chamber, go to the other. So I'm always seeking legislative ideas that are pragmatic and practical. So do you have any recommendations? And maybe it's a recommendation for regulatory reform, you know, removing some burdensome thing that you see on the books for businesses. But do you have any ideas of things that maybe Raleigh should be focused on to, you know, help our economy, to spur the tech sector? You know, kind of a broad question here, and maybe you don't have an answer right away, but love to hear your thoughts. And I think for the whole panel, if any of you have ideas for legislation, you know, get them to me, because this is, I think, how the best laws are often passed and made.
Yeah, I'm of the view that, you know, I want as little government as necessary. You know, that's kind of the view that I have. So I don't really have a lot of legislative ideas, but I will tell you that I travel the whole country, or at least I used to travel. Now I do it through Zoom, but and you know, I was the economist for the California Chamber for several years, and I can see how that state has really messed up, and they have an adversarial relationship between government and business, and that and we need to make sure that we don't do that here in North Carolina, and that what's really made the South in general work is that business, government, and labor all seem to be working together. And when you go into the Midwest, and you go to Chicago, or you go into the Northeast or into California, they all seem to be working independently and often working against each other. And so you know, whatever we can do to foster that environment and continue to work together, I use the example because somebody asked about, you know, you've seen the restaurant operator in LA who's, you know, just incredibly upset that they've shut her down, but they're letting the movie stars eat at an outdoor catered venue. And I said, you know, it reminds me of a conversation I had, and I don't remember the exact context, but I remember I was in Gainesville, Georgia, and the CEO of a company told me that he wasn't buying our forecast. This was coming out of the Great Recession, that he thought that the stimulus program was going to create a mess. And he says, just look at that paving project that held us all up getting here. He said, that road was perfectly fine. They're just paving. He said, it's just a way for them to funnel dollars into the local government. And he says, it's all going to go to waste. He goes, I'm not boosting my capital spending budget. And so when people see government doing things that they think are foolish in one area, it causes a response in another area that you would have never thought. And, you know, so and I think that's where California is right now. And I think that maybe what's happening in Seattle and Portland and Minneapolis, which is causing people to leave those areas. And we're on the receiving end of that. So we just need to not flub it up.
Perfect. And we have a kind of a flurry of questions starting to come in. Question on tech IPOs have had a monster year this year. Do you see that theme continuing into 2021?
I think it will. I mean, I don't know what the breaking point is. I am a little worried about a bubble, and that every time we do a stimulus bill, the Treasury has to auction off debt, and the Federal Reserve buys all or not most of it. And they do that with newly created money. So the money supply is rocketed up, and that money has to go somewhere. It seems to be going into assets. And because we don't have a whole lot of inflation right now, so it's going into assets. And there are a lot of very good concepts. I think that, DoorDash, the price that they're going to get, it looks like it's going to IPO over $100, about a $40 billion valuation. I'm not quite sure, how many deliveries they're going to have to make in order to make that make sense. But you've got Airbnb, which coming out, and I'm sure that one will do well too. It feels to be like we're in the early stages of a bubble, so I think that we've got a long way to go. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a bubble, but I think that what will cause a correction is that most folks believe that the Federal Reserve is going to keep their foot on the gas, meaning they'll continue to periodically do QE when we continue to run big budget deficits, and they will hold interest rates down at very low levels. Most folks think the Fed's not going to raise rates until 2024, 2025. I think they will raise rates sooner than that. You look at that map that showed you the unemployment rates, 3% in Nebraska, 4.1% in Utah, and 4.5% in Georgia, which is the 7th largest economy in the country. The Fed's going to raise rates sooner than people think. And when that gets the market, that's when we'll probably have a correction. Whether or not it's a bubble that burst, I think it's too soon to tell.
Well, Mark, I want to be sensitive to everybody's time. We're approaching the 9 o'clock hour. We really appreciate you spending the time, and our likewise our special guests, the fund of the month, and everyone for joining. If there are any other questions, Mark, I've found to be very accessible for as big wig of an executive he is at Wells Fargo. So feel free to lob over any additional questions. I know we have some there in the chat box as well. A reminder, again, our next program is going to be on March 3rd, 2021, Venture Capital Roundtable, leading VCs from the Carolinas and across the U.S. And we want to thank you all again for attending. Hope you all have a great holiday and look forward to a prosperous 2021. Thanks all.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.